Today's session is titled Activating the Tikar, Reimagining Politics and Economics. It will be joined by Director of RogueArt in Kuala Lumpur, Ms. Beverly Yong, who will examine how ideas and effects are brought together in the socially engaged practices of Yee I-Lann. Using the Tikar as an example, Yong will share her interpretations and her work in collaboration that she's done with Yee. Please leave your questions in the chat box once again. They may be addressed at the very end during a Q&A session. And without further ado, I would actually like to turn my time over to Ms. Beverly Yong. Thank you, Beverly.
Can you see my screen?
Not yet. Yeah, got it.
Yeah. Hello, Kopibosian. Ahap Sangum, Selamat Petang. Ni hao, ni hao. And thank you for joining me for this talk. Thank you, Bruce, for the kind introduction, and thank you, chat, for inviting me to share today. Well, welcome to Activating the Tikar, Lessons in Reimagining Politics and Economics with Yee I-Lann. I'm going to dive straight in and try to break down the grand claims of this title. Artist, activist, activating the Tikar. So thank you very much to Takahashi Mizuki, who has put together this wonderful exhibition at chat, who asked if I could talk about the connection between I-Lann's work as an artist and I-Lann's work as an activist, particularly in relation to the Tikar, or woven mat collaborations, which are presented in her show and also in the Borneo Heart exhibition on which I worked with I-Lann earlier this May, which is a continuing project. So Mizuki's request really opened up an interesting challenge to see how activism manifests in the artist's work, also its motivations and where it comes from. Let's take a look at the artist's kind of view of her role and the idea of activism. So we see an artist who believes in her role as active part of the community. Apart from making art that continues conversations, she makes things happen. She's a spokesperson, a doer, a workshopper. She's active in various communities. So over her 25 years when she lived in Kuala Lumpur from the 90s, she worked as an art director in film. She taught film studies. She was involved in the underground music scene with her partner Joe Kidd. She was involved in social activism, working with transgender communities. She campaigned on environmental issues. I mean, there are all sorts of things that even I'm not aware of that she would have been involved in. She was steeped in activist circles and so forth. Now that she's moved back to Sabah, she's also becoming quite a visible figure, I believe, within sort of social activist circles and also within the art scene. So, but apart from an early period in the 90s, when she was sort of experimental period, when she sort of experimented with working with art and activism together, her activities as an organizer and a social activist have by and large been quite different from, quite separate from her work as an artist and the way she's sort of been positioned in the global or contemporary art scene, or even the local art scene. Even though I feel that they respond to similar threads in her thinking. So art making is a kind of way of thinking through issues and problems, whereas her social activism, if you like to call it that, would have more practical impacts. But the thing is that when we come to Borneo Heart, we come to the Tikar project, we kind of start to intuit a sort of shift in this relation between her art making and activism as such. So we'll look at that when we come to Borneo Heart. Lessons and learning with. I've added that bit to the title. I'd like to look at I-Lann's really art making as a process of learning. So lessons are the lessons that we find through her work and that she uses her art to learn. And also, I think since the late 90s, I've been working with Yee I-Lann on various projects. So it's also a little bit about what I've learned in the process of engaging with her work. So politics and economics. So let's pull out Yee I-Lann on politics. So it's not an abstract concept. Politics is how we organize ourselves. And I think it's quite important to home in on this, this way of looking at it. It's about all of us. And what I will try to do through this presentation is to try to read with Yee I-Lann and with you ways in which her work attempts from its very early beginnings to underline, understand, and reimagine our relation to politics as social systems of organization and also as structures of power. So economics falls into politics in this sense. It's also important that she relates the idea of politics with different kinds of knowledge and how we keep and transmit knowledge. And that will become key to how art making comes into this idea of reimagining politics. I'll try to do this through a few sort of broad areas which relate to specific works. So and ways of thinking about politics. So the personal political, so Yee I-Lann as citizen artist, the importance of finding ourselves within our polity as such, the aesthetics of power, so bodies of work which actually try to visualize the political, very importantly, women and ecologies. Very briefly, the culture of consumption and consumption of culture, because I put economics in the title, and then we will come to Borneo Heart. But first, why reimagine? So this is a 10-meter billboard format work called Kerba, which means water buffalo, which was made in 2007. So this was made at the same year as the historic Bersih rally, the first Bersih rally by the Coalition for Clean and Fair Elections in Malaysia, followed closely by another big rally by the Hindu Rights Action Force. So it's come to represent a moment of coming together for change in Malaysia. So ostensibly, it's an image of protest, of galvanization of the people, if you like. But I'm interested to know what it says now to us. So I feel that we're at a time when finally there's a consensus that we have to change the world, right? And that, yeah, we all seem stuck and not really sure how to move or where to go from there. We're still overwhelmed by the systems and the assumptions that we take for granted. I like this picture because although it looks like a protest, they've knocked over a few cones. Some of the Kerba looking here or there. Here we all are. What are we going to do now? What I particularly like about it is this space we see running through the middle of the crowd that seems to enter in into some sort of possibility. And so when we talk about reimagining and reimagination, it's not about an artist envisioning or mapping out of some kind of alternative structure or utopian construct. I sense in Yee I-Lann's art maybe a sort of reaching out for possibilities about how we can change the way we look at and how we do politics and how we do economics or how we organize ourselves. So if we begin with the personal political, which will home in into Rasa Sayang, the work, which we will translate roughly into a feeling of love and loss. I want to go here because in order to talk about how we organize ourselves, we first need to find the me and the we. We need to identify how we engage with the political structures we are born into or that we operate in. So I'm going to look at a few works that respond to sort of Yee I-Lann's immediate sort of Malaysian political context and as a Malaysian citizen. We're going to rewind back to 1998. and the mid-90s when she first started out in her career. Sort of back in '96, she'd begun to collaborate with architect and urban designer Nani Kaha on a series of community-based events celebrating sort of popular culture under the banner of Lab DNA. So they made a experimental theater production. They actually organized KL's first rave parties, which included art installations, experimental music. Some of them were quite controversial. And then in 1998, we come to the Anwar Crisis, where the sacking and arrest of our former Deputy Prime Minister for corruption and sodomy triggered a protest movement calling for social, political, and economic change. We call it Reformasi. So Spacebar was their 5th project, and it was held between Anwar's sacking and his arrest. Yee-I-Lann made an installation of over 2,000 snapshots from her collection with a big question mark in the middle. Nani cooked chicken soup to heal and console. Joe Kidd and his friends as Masto Blasto presented sort of soundscape of recorded sounds from Anwar's speeches and from TV news, accompanied by live music. So in their description, they say it was a highly tumultuous time, but underlying the confusion, there was great excitement that the citizenry were speaking up. We too wanted to do something. And so we have this spirit in the 90s of the creative community wanting to engage and get involved socially. Yee-I-Lann was very much part of that. And she was finding ways within Lab DNA to activate art as part of popular culture, and how that in turn can address the political, right? Maybe through this element of play and this element of collaboration. So that's quite important. Within the work itself, the snapshot is the personal and the public, the personal and the political, the personal and the mass. So it's interesting she will use this sort of structure again. So I just wanted to bring this back to just underline the importance of art as play, sort of versus the political game that the powers that be play. And the fact that collaboration has been a key element in her practice throughout. But then we come to Yee-I-Lann, the Malaysian citizen. And today I wish you all happy Malaysia Day. So one of Yee-I-Lann's major campaigns has been to bring Malaysia Day into the national consciousness. Malaysia Day is the day in which Malaysia was formed by the signatories of North Borneo, now Sabah, Sarawak, Singapore, and the Federation of Malaya. Now, it's not a day we've recognized through our history until about 2010. We've always celebrated the independence of Malaya on the 31st of August. So for Yee-I-Lann, the Malaysian citizen, this is problematic because the premise of her belonging is not been recognized. Sabah's contribution, its histories, Sarawak's too, have been felt to be marginalized within the larger narrative of the country. So her recourse has been through art to create, to enter Malaysia Day into this national imagination. She created a series of commemorative pewter plates for the day, featuring the proclamation of Malaysia by the 4 leaders. And I thought people in Hong Kong would enjoy the commemorative craft that she made. A good morning towel, some cleaning materials, some stationery, but the idea of using these familiar objects that we could buy and buy into Malaysia Day is very much part of her stratagems. The employment of sort of this, what she calls political kitsch, mass imaginary. So it's been a long campaign to educate Peninsular Malaysians such as myself. So happy Malaysia Day. Another work that addresses foundational politics as such is fundamental liberties. So this work, it's a ticker tape work which highlights some of the fundamental liberties within enshrined in the Malaysian Constitution, but in different languages spoken by the population. And you will see that they're being shot at and destroyed by sort of space invaders. these evil creatures. The important, it's again a fun work, but tackling quite a serious sort of problem perceived of the erosion of liberties. So not only is it a reminder of our constitutional claims, but it is also important in the sense of being inclusive of all the languages of everyone. So the idea of these works to correct assumptions, to claim knowledge, to understand our foundation of politics is very important. But it brings us to an epic work called Rasa Sayang, which is made up of 488 photographic images. And it's presented at Chat, and it was presented at Born Your Heart as well. Rasa Sayang, as we said, it literally translated can mean sort of the feeling of love. It's also the feeling of loss, because sayang can indicate a sense of loss, a wasted opportunity, for example. And it's a work made over now 11 years. Every 2 years, she would create a chapter, and it's in response to specific political situations in Malaysia, general elections, and campaigns, that kind of thing. And for me, it's a sort of love letter to the country. It is made up of human embraces. So images she took of people embracing, images she invited friends and people through Facebook to send pictures of them hugging. And it cuts across the demographic, East and West Malaysia, the different ethnic communities, different across religious divides, language divides. It's a coming together. It's really a feeling of love. If we read it, these are the first 3 chapters. And beginning, the sun will rise in the east. Alternatively, we have feelings of hope, of frustration and suspicion. And of, oh well, hell with this, love, right? So it's a long, slow work talking about people trying to be together. And at birthday, for birthday 2012, this is birthday 4, she made a Rasa Sayang banner on batik sarong. Again, another sort of iconic national symbol, something that a lot of Malaysians wear, the batik sarong. And so we have here, love is protest, love is activism. It's corny as hell, but it is, and that's Yee I-Lann with her yellow hat, birthday hat. Behind her, you can see Sayang Malaysia, love Malaysia. So these collaborative aspects of activism also feed in. So birthday was special in the sense that it was it involved collaboration across political parties and different civil society groups. So love is the answer. And then when we're looking at Yee I-Lann's work as what we might call a solo artist as well, I want to look at these works that perhaps we can call looking at the aesthetics of power, specifically of patriarchal and colonial power, in which we're kind of a way of visualizing power structures, which help us feel and understand imaginatively what they may be. This is a text from Fluid World, whereby when Yee I-Lann had a conversation with Anthony Milner, a historian of Malaya, explaining why she wanted to make the series Orang Besar. I'm curious about the bondage between persons' notions of obligation and patronage, critical to these power structures that sculpt Malaysia's political and even economic structures. Right? There's also an interesting idea of this continuity between historical systems and habits within the contemporary. So in the visual world here, time has collapsed. or rather feeds off each other. So these were three central works within the larger Orang Besar series, which we worked on together for a show back in 2010, I think. Yes. So these are works in batik again, and they see Yee-I-Lann thinking about here already local craft forms and languages, textile, and also even the hierarchies embedded in her materials use in the history, which I believe there was a talk on yesterday. So there's a lot of embedded knowledge in these works and a lot to read. So she did a lot of research on traditional Malay world power structures. And these center on the Orang Besar and the Raja, right? The Orang Besar is the big person, literally, whose worth is measured on the number of his dependents or the people who support him. So this idea of patronage and power being with the dependents, being measured in people again. And she's using here the sort of literal body for the body politic, but also natural metaphors, the parasitic plant, for example. And she's playing with social architecture within that sort of compositional form. It's also interesting that she uses batik with its notions. It's the medium which is functions on dye and resist. Again, the political weightage of that. And it's also a medium that is mainly made by women. And we'll come back to that again when we come to Borneo Heart and the Tikar collaboration. So it's a women's craft describing an essentially male system of power. In terms of hierarchies, these are kain panjang, which were traditionally worn by the elite. I mean, they wind tighter around your body so you can't move much. And if you don't have to work, you don't have to move much. Whereas the normal people would have to wear a sarong, would be wearing a sarong, which allows more movement, right? Freedom of movement. So this is the carnivorous plant, the carnivorous kapala. This is the petulant kapala with the mimosa. Here we see the structure is inverted. Here the single man is holding up the others. So Milner and Yee-I-Lann actually read the images together in this interview, and they discuss how there's a sense of energy and struggle in these works, and also about hierarchies that are not static as such. They're very organic, structures that are organic and volatile. There's anxiety, the struggle. It's these are like ships careering about in the water. And so I think for the contemporary Malaysian, looking at these images of men in contemporary dress as well, it's quite a visceral idea and quite a compelling idea of how we might feel modern Malay world politics, Malaysian politics. Almost opposite to that, we have Picturing Power in 2013. And this grew out of a workshop in Yogyakarta based on a collection of archival photos from the colonial period. And it has an opposite feel. It's cold. It's this cold, quiet, creeping aesthetic of colonial power. There's a poise in these works I think you barely find in any of her works. It's very impersonal. So she talks about these works as being about the violence of administrative control, colonial administration, the violence of ordering, conditioning of perspective. The perspective you can see is very directed. You've got the lens is pointed, the view, the panoramic view. In the last image, the native is looking through the lens of the theodolite, through the lens of the colonizer. So using the colonizer's scale of measurement. She talks about colonization as generational, as something violent because it is passed through knowledge, and given knowledge. And everywhere, of course, there's the table, the school table, the officer's table, which becomes a symbol of that power. Most importantly, women and ecologies. This is another image from Picturing Power, but it's somewhat different in feel. It's titled, Wherein One Cultivates Cultural Codes, the Noble Endeavors of Mankind, and thereby puts them in their place. And this talks about cultivation and culture. So the bamboo is ordered like a fence. There's latex, rubber latex in the handmade vessels. You've got the white man on his horse, the bull tied to its yoke. There's a narrative here about monocropping and taking over the colonization of land and so forth. But dominating the middle ground, there's all this mess of hair. This hair, this crazy hair between two pairs of women. It's almost like a loom, a kind of continuity. And there's a very powerful sense that this is a different picture of power. It's an alternative. And so part of reimagining politics and economics here in Yee-Lann's work is, of course, reimagining women. We will go back then to a quite well-known image of Yee-Lann's from her Kinabalu series in 2007 of Huminodun, goddess of the rice harvest. I'm going to try to see if I can fit in the Kadazan Dusun creation story, which is often named after her. So Kino Ingan, who created the universe, and his wife Sumundu, who created the earth, had an only daughter named Penampuan. Angered at man's destruction and abuse of the earth, Kino Ingan punished man with 7 plagues, including famine. So Penampuan offered to sacrifice herself to appease her father, and her body gave rise to 7 edible plants to feed the people, including rice from her flesh, rice being the most essential to the well-being of the world. She was given the name Huminodun, and to this day, her Bebohisan priestesses continue to safeguard and bless the rice harvest. And this is very connected to the central role that women play in rice cultivation, harvest, and sale in Kadazan Dusun culture. And giving them a very central role in the communities and tied to the economy, to the ecosystem. So this whole role of women. So the reimagining here is also remembering. It's key because today, Sabah now imports more rice than it produces. Right? Oil palm production and plantations have all but entirely displaced rice agriculture in Sabah. So it's not only devastating rainforests and environment, perhaps even compromising local food security, but it's also forcing change in which women have lost the traditional role in economy and society. What happens when that happens? And we'll see how the Tikar works also relate to this. And when we go back and further in Yee-Lann's work, we see the monocrop in the Horizon series in the palm of Putrajaya. Putrajaya is the administrative seat of the federal government. So again, allusions to the ordering and controlling of identity, kind of, if you like, it's the sort of neo-colonization, if you like, of the sort of independent peoples. Another woman with messy hair is the Pontianak. And this series, this is a billboard relating to a series of photographic works. So the Pontianak, if you don't know already, they are avenging long-haired vampires that suck the blood of virgins and rip out the insides of men. And they live in banana trees. So Sabah is also named after a type of banana. And so the Pontianak is obviously a character that Yee-Lann identifies with quite closely. So the idea of the Pontianak is that it instills the fear of the wild female, the unknown, feminine power. If you like, it's the fear of the female activist. So this is a sort of lampooning of that fear. And as importantly, or more importantly, she has made this reading list for Pontianak. And this is really articulating perspectives and histories of women's positioning in society. I mean, through the roads of her own research in political and economic history, in cultural studies. It's about sharing knowledge about women by women perspectives. So I just want to note some of the subtitles here, which I'm not sure you can see. So on the banana tree at the gate, changes in state, rise of the monocrop and the colonial state. Or on domination and the arts of resistance, women's bodies and the body politic. So we're not only invited to reimagine women in the context of economics and politics, we are invited to reimagine politics and economics in the context of women. And very briefly on the culture of consumption and the consumption of culture, because we put economics in the title, we go back again to a project with Lab DNA, by at Substation Gallery in Singapore during the 1998 recession. It's a fairly self-explanatory work. There were 500 white plastic bags installed with texts relating to consumption, consumerism. And at the same time, there was a performance whereby yellow plastic bags with related texts were handed out to people in night markets and hawker centers in Singapore and in KL, which is related again to this work called Buy Me, which is a series of PVC handbags, which feature the faces of stateless Bajau children. And they have thought bubbles of global brand icons and media slogans. And we brought this to one of the world's largest art fairs in 2002, Arco, Madrid. So I highlight these early sort of interactive campaigns because they address the problematics of consumerism, the exploitative neo-colonial aspects of the global economic order, because it implicates all of us, our thinking, our decisions, our brand loyalties, and they're very deliberately positioned in places where people consume. So wherever we are really in the world, has this changed? So 20 years on, I mean, what have we learned apart from to recycle and reuse? That brings us to Borneo Heart. There she is, Yee I-Lann. I think she's protesting possibly a dam or a coal mine. I'm sorry, I don't know. Jaga hati kami. Look after our heart, because Borneo is the heart of the world. Its rainforests serve the earth. And we come to the poster that she made, which sort of gave birth to the name of the exhibition and project we're working on together. Because Borneo Heart was really about a homecoming. On the one hand, Yee-Lann coming home, trying to find a community there. She'd left Kuala Lumpur partly because of illness, partly I think to change away, to get away from the sort of toxic politics that have been happening at the time around 2016, 2017. So it's about finding home and finding community, this idea of Borneo Heart, but it's also Borneo, the heart of the world. The heart between the two lungs of the Amazon and the Congo, the rainforests of Borneo, the Coral Triangle, its importance as our beating heart as such. So we're also see we're moving away from this idea of nation and state, looking at places geography as belonging as geography, and it's being tied into natural ecologies. As she moves away from party politics at that level, there's also a turn towards grassroots activism. That this is where the activism will move from now. There's also a turn away from the kind of some of the kinds of languages that we've seen. A turn towards this idea of the local language as opposed to the modern urban language. Not a move away, but a diving into. And this sense of solutions being found perhaps within traditional storytelling, traditional aesthetics, traditional ideas and thinking from home. So how to communicate, engage with people, and find common languages using these tools. So for Borneo Heart and for the Tikar project in many senses, there are these very fundamental, simple ideas. Tanah air, homeland, which breaks into tanah dan air, land and water. Tikar, a woven mat. Tamu, weekly market. So this, her globalized language comes back to a local vocabulary and key concepts, which help to reimagine a specific politics, but also beyond that. Tanah dan air is an important concept because it is about a geography, once again, torn apart by animosity. Tika and Tamu become two fundamental basic concepts as possible solutions. And she works through them as art-based collaborations. The objects themselves explore language, they explore the architectural or social function of form, and also aesthetics. So Tanah represents sort of land. We've been thinking about the land and just the inland peoples of Borneo, of Sabah, like the Kadazan Dusun. Yee-Lann's grandmother was Kadazan Dusun, the Murut people and others. There are many different indigenous groups. The historically inland peoples were independent peoples. And Ayer would be the sort of represented by the sea peoples, the Suluk, the Bajau, often nomadic, but associated historically with the Sulu and Brunei empires, which imposed taxes on and raided the interior. So that's part of the historic animosity. So more recent times, the inland tribes have dominated politics. And then there's this further suspicion driven by the MLF, Filipino claims to Sabah, and this very large population of stateless nomadic sea peoples around the coastline. So Sabah sort of now remains politically divided as a result, and this weakens its voice and position within the Malaysian polity. So this becomes the problematic, the political problematic now, the starting problem for the project in a sense. So she looks at how do we address this distance and how it might be bridged. And she decides to work with communities in the Sumurut community in the inland, in the interior, and the Bajau Samajilao and Bajau Tempatan community in Pulau Omadal and Sempurna on the coast. And then so a very large part of the Borneo Heart story is the story of these two communities. So the first test match she made with them were with Tanah Airku. These are later later versions of Tanah Airku. But you can see here, the mat becomes a billboard. We're activating the mat. The mat becomes a billboard. It's a statement of land and sea coming together, of home. So this was from Sempurna, and this is from Keningau. That's at the exhibition, Borneo Heart, and where they made the weavers with the mat, where they made it. So what is the tikar? Okay, Yee-Lann has sort of 2 pages on why the tikar, but very roughly associations, an everyday object used for eating, sleeping, drying, making love. Also a ritual item for weddings, and a space for community, right? It's made by women mostly. It's everywhere in Southeast Asia and beyond, of course. In Yee-Lann's work, it becomes a platform, a stage, a billboard for storytelling and sharing. So this image is chapter 1 of Measuring Project. It's actually four images. It's sort of a conceptual sketchbook of how to use a tikar, or reimagining politics on the tikar. And the idea comes from the way the Omadal weavers measure their mats, which is to measure it with their footsteps, one foot in front of the other. And they say live, or hidup mati, hidup, in order to, and you always have to start on life. Hidup is live, mati is die. You have to start on life and you have to end on life. So then your mat will be measured out by your footsteps. And this idea of measuring by the individual, measuring something is very important. And we look back again to the way she's expressed the body politic and Orang Besar, and even the kerbau, the body. So it's a very beautiful idea of measurement, measuring politics, if you like, measuring political space by the person. You also see, of course, the languages of performance art documentation, also I-Lann's own sort of lexicon of loaded imageries, as she sketches out these organizational ideas. So you have the people on the mat, on the table, the table representing hard power, given knowledge. The mat is communal, egalitarian. And the shadow of the table on top, right? Looking into the mat here, into the mouth of the Nantwa Panjar, which is where people gather around to drink together in traditional practice. Right? Here we have the messy hair again as roots. So about rootedness, about home. And finally, just simply coming together at four corners of a mat in discursiveness. So a very important element of the mat is when you have a meeting and there's no space of you on the mat, you come late, then the host will lay down another mat and so forth. And so it's something that can be expanded. It is egalitarian, it is expansive, it is inclusive. So it's a powerful but very simple idea. So how do we activate the mat? What is activating the Tikar? So one way, of course, is through social activism. And I-Lann is involved, among other things, that she's involved with a social collaborative called Forever Sabah, which does community projects, facilitator training, knowledge sharing. It's involved in various community projects and funding and facilitating. So this is community engagement empowerment, grassroots style. Here we see her giving a session on power politics, change in the circular economy. It's within a module of the Forever Sabah Institute. And she is working with the participants to build a timeline of Sabah's history drawn from their own memories. So it's a methodology that comes from the mat, if you like. But what we're really talking about is activating the Tikar through art making here. And so this is Tikar Agaga. So the Tikar project launched this very ambitious collaboration in 2018, which was a response to National Gallery of Singapore's Outward Bound Commission, where they invited I-Lann to make a work for their foyer. And so she uses this to address this idea of bridging Tanah dan Air, to work with the two communities. And they make the 17-meter Tikar Agaga, which means sort of giant, gargantuan mat. It's an audacious display of skill, of inherited knowledge, of cultural identity, but perhaps most importantly, the potential of collaboration. We should know that neither a group of weavers nor I-Lann herself would ever have attempted anything like this before. And even if previous collaborative projects and working in film might have fed into this, nothing, I think, has matched the depth and effort of this and the ensuing work they've been doing together. So I'm not sure if you can see on the left side on top, we see the motifs that are on the Sempurna side of the mat, the Bajau side of the mat. So traditional motifs, the houseboat sail, Samba Layang. On the right, the Nekiotan lobster motif. On the right side of the slide, some of the motifs on the Kinenga weaver side, a bit more complex and dense with story, images from the harvest, traditional motifs, and things like that. So, so they're bringing all these knowledges. So the mat as repositories of knowledge. You can see the vast difference between the approaches and also the materials used, the colors of the sea, colors of the inland, right? Colors of the harvest. So it's also embedded stories, right? And experiences. But the collaborative aspect is what has, I think, entirely changed or transformed the way artist Yee-Lann has worked now, or thinking really, and it's informed this idea of reimagining politics in a whole new different dimension, I feel. For herself, it's been reimagining the organization of her own art making, the politics of her own practice, which I'm sure it's not been entirely resolved even, but it's about letting go of a certain way of looking or control over making to create a line of vision that encompasses and accommodates others, that feeds into their lives and feeds her. So it's a new level of commitment and responsibility and sacrifice, but also a rich source of learning. So I'm afraid I would love to introduce everybody here, but just to give a face to the collaborators and the sort of small extent of the scale of collaboration. These are some of the collaborators from Kningau and from Omadal. And I just wanted to create this sense to try to visualize quickly this idea of making together. There are also the Tagaps Dance Theatre here, who worked with Yee-Lann on the Punkis, the performance and video. And here we have also a sense that Yee-Lann can't speak Bajau, for example, so she works through Rosia, the chief collaborator, Rosia Jalalid, with her on the mat in the middle. And a lot of it is done sort of via WhatsApp and visits. Before the MCO, she had to drive between Semporna and Kningau, and there's also that sense of bridging. So it's a big operation, and a big joining up of communities, made more so now by the international exhibitions that they've been together. But another really key thing that has emerged is how the project has can nudge towards reimagining creative economies, right? Ideas about how art can change the world, as she has put it ambitiously, or really just the tremendous potential in the real life impacts of such an art collaboration on domestic economies. What does that mean? Throughout the project together, we've been trying to include conversations and ensure that we learn from each other through interviews, as much communication as much as possible, then to get a sense of how the collaborators also feel about the project and their input. So, and through that there has been a learning. So to just some background, Pulau Omadal, on Pulau Omadal, most of the weavers are stateless, and they live on a water village just off the island. So they live a precarious life, no safety nets. Before the Tikar project, their income was mostly from fishing, the men going fishing in the precious coral triangle, and mostly for seafood for tourists in Sabah. As heritage tepo, the mats that they make, were barely made, couldn't be found, because they were not valued by the tourist market or the local market. There was no market for them, and the amount of time taken to make, its time and skill, it wasn't worth making. So when the Tikar project started, and they all started to make their own mats for sale, which Yee I-Lann sells through her label, Kerbal Works. They became the breadwinners of the community, and there was a shift in the whole domestic economy. So they became taking a central role, more so during the pandemic, when there has been no market for fishing. So this is Kap Budi, talking about how how making tikar has changed her way of life, or the way her domestic economy, and also Kak Sana. Just to give a sense of where they're coming from. So the chief collaborator, Rosia Jalalid, is also an activist. She is the founder and chairperson of Wanita, the Pulau Omadal Women's Association, WAPO. So they support the community and also marine conservation. So another element that comes into it is to promote a sort of almost micro-circular economy. So that the pandanus leaves, which are taken from the coastline, are replanted by the community just to ensure the safeguard the marine habitat in those areas. So sustainable industry is something that is happening too here. So we get a sense now that it's an ongoing, it's really yes, empowering a community and making change, and then it's a continuing project. For the weavers in Keningau, they are from just some more communities, and they're trained or involved with the Keningau Craft Center, the Sabah Craft Center in Keningau. They are skilled professional weavers who have been working for the tourist industry, sort of working for the mass industry, which is a very important industry in Sabah. But again, it's slowed down because of the pandemic. But for them, working with the tikar, working with Yee I-Lann has meant that they've been more confident and able to push ideas and create beyond what is expected of the industry, from the industry. So there is a kind of spirit of new entrepreneurship and kind of creativity. But at the same time, the project has also highlighted issues like the increasing difficulty of sourcing bamboo, because again, palm oil has pushed the wild bamboo areas closer and closer to the river. And also the problem of how to sustain and train new generations of weavers and the craftspeople. So these are all, I do hope that you can join the conversation through our website. There are various longer conversations with all involved. Yes, this is Yee I-Lann on how art can change the world. So it's about value. Another way of activating the tikar is, of course, when it enters the community. Here, the Bajalawat side of the map is taken to the Lepa Boat Festival. It's also taken to the Bajalawat conference. And there's this celebration of heritage, of it entering and being ownership celebration. So that becomes a form of activation. When it goes into, for example, the National Gallery of Singapore, I can't. Again, it's a form of activation. There's a deliberate statement. There's a question asked. What happens when traditional crafts aesthetics enters the Southeast Asian Modern and Contemporary Art Museum? What audiences does the museum speak to? Right. Sorry, my computer's slow, so I've not been able to zoom in on that slide. Can the museum be less of a table and more of a mat? So that was the tikar. There's Kak Julita from Keningau and Kak Rosia, and they're in the museum. So this was the tikar. And what is a tamu? Let me get there. So the tamu is a traditional farmers market in Sabah, where the people of the hills, the plains, the rivers, and the sea meet to exchange their respective produce. It's age old. There's no sort of historical timeline. So for example, rice for salt, pearls for rattan. It forms the foundation of a social political landscape. So it's, quoting from Yee I-Lann, it is where you exchange news and stories, fight and fall in love, where you get to know who your neighbor is. It's a celebration of the other, of diversity. So this idea of the market is made real by this project called Katamu, which Yee I-Lann is involved in with some fellow collaborators. And here they're reviving the tamu together with including art, artisanal craft, art and craft, sustainable produce from the sea, and rice. So I'd like to sort of highlight this rice project Paddy. And this is a project supported by Forever Sabah, where a community of the Yee I-Lann community have been growing 34 varieties of rice. It's a self-sustainability project, also to activate the younger generation in getting involved with rice, with the culture of rice harvest. And these are the mats sold on the right, sold by the Sempurna weavers under the Kerbal Works label. And part of the proceeds will go back into, are going back into building a balai bikin, a place for making onplau or madal. So there's this pushing towards sort of circular economies, ideas of self-sustainability, mutual sustainability, sort of sustaining each other, sustaining ourselves within these practices, right? Linked to activism and linked through the art. But essentially, conceptually, it's the central concept of a meeting place for exchange, which works together with the tamu, of course. So where value is placed in diversity and what we need from others. Democratic, self-driven. So it's an opposite strategy of colonialism or neo-colonialism. It's the opposite strategy of divide and conquer or monocropping. So we brought the sort of central sort of theme or tenet of our exhibition and project can be sort of, its motif is here, which is exploding the and, the dan. This is one of four words. So the ways in which I talked about architectural form earlier, visualizing the architecture of politics and using and how that's translated into form. So so the tikar has been activated as a billboard within the museum. So just quickly looking through some others, the mat and the table as a concept. So if we remember picturing power, the question Yee I-Lann likes to ask when she introduces this work is, how do you colonize someone's mind? And that's talking about the violence of administration, about tables. So here, the mat, there are 60 mats made in Sempurna, and each has a table. And it's a bit like the game of scissors, paper, stone, where the mat swallows the table. The idea of this wall of tikar with a table embedded. So it's trying to reverse that idea, or seeing what happens when you put a table on a mat, if you like. It's about recognizing where power lies as politics deriving from citizenry. Right? So hence the mass, but also the variety, individualism of each mat. Originally, also, she's talked about how she was very directional in working with this project. It's one of the first projects she did. An event giving specific mat designs to be woven, even though obviously the backing is, the background patterns are chosen by the weavers. So eventually the children and the children were identified some of the tables that were going to be drawn, made sketches, and it became much more of a conversation and a more complex idea of what the table could be. So there are school tables, there's the Rehal for the Quran, there's the podium that the politicians use when they come to the island to speak. So more knowledge is, but more ideas and stories are then built into this general concept of the mat and the table. In this double-sided mat, and I think in chat you will see the names of the weavers suspended from the top. On one side is the shadow of tables, and actually the inverse is the names of the weavers. So the story behind this work, it has a sense of claiming of an identity and a presence through the tikar, because the stateless do not have names. It's called Tepanya number na, which is mat with a number. And it was a name suggested by Katbudi. The sense that the mat is, they're investing the mat with an identity, claiming it through their cultural heritage, through their creative labor. So yes, in a sense, that billboard stands again, but the flip side of the table, the shadow of the tables on the other side, always looming. The ridges on the roof of your mouth, hill ridges without end, and to journey with no specific direction. These are just some of the rather poetic translations of names of traditional motifs used in the work of the Kiningau, woven by the Kiningau weavers. And I think these are really about learning an old language. It's very different from the Sempurna mats, which kind of speak through the color. Here, there are motifs where I think Yee-Lann's really exploring visual reading in different ways, and trying to make make dynamic these different motifs. And she talks about, we can talk about sort of corridors of power, tables turning. There's a sort of porousness in the colors coming through. There are various meanings and ideas embedded within the motifs that we have to learn to read. We can learn to read. And then to sort of start to understand the potential of this language, we can talk about Mansau Ansau, which means to journey without a specific direction. And this is actually a weave that Yee-Lann and Lily, I believe, and Julita and Sharizan invented in the process of working together. And it's a weave which is not repetitive. There has no specific, it journeys without an end, literally. So it's a feel of the weave, and it's very beautiful and random. But again, at the same time, must be dastardly difficult to achieve. But the idea of a journey without end, a kind of sense of keeping exploring. Another, I think, motto for the Borneo Heart Project, the Tikar collaboration, that it will keep journeying with no set direction. A seven-headed hat, a cry in the forest. There's this extraordinary seven-headed Landau hat, which is worn for the video Punkis. Punkis is a cry, warrior cry. So this is the only male work in the Borneo Heart exhibition, which was made with Tagap's Dance Theatre. And Tagap's Dance Theatre, because they're both fluent in contemporary dance forms, hip hop, K-pop, and traditional dance. And so it's interpreted by the choreographer and the dancers, and set to the sounds of the forest. And some very interesting things happened along the way. But the hat itself has this extraordinary kind of network, this idea of, I suppose, very simply kind of a group think, but it also then is a challenge, a kind of learning, a bit like Brambasa, trying to understand kind of male political behavior in a sense, what happens in a group together. And again, using different elements of traditional storytelling, the Lalanda hat, which is here, a traditional Murut headdress. The Murut were the jungle hunters, traditionally thought of as warriors, the warrior people. And then the hat becomes activated, right? It comes out of its context. Here on the right in full dress, that's worn by the weavers and their community. And then at the exhibition, it's worn by the ladies who launched the exhibition, the mayor of Kota Kinabalu, the head of the Sabah International Convention Center, the director of the Sabah Art Gallery, and Yee I-Lann. All with a group of visiting corporates. So this sense of activating art within the exhibition space is also quite nice. I apologize, it's a bit slow trying to move. I think the last work I'd like to look at is Tikar ribbon, a dictionary, a bridge. And this is a beautiful 62.9 meter long tikar, which stretches across from the shoreline of Pulau Awadal, where the local villagers live, to the stateless water village. And it's a sort of dictionary of counting patterns of the Bajau people. So you'll see different patterns and motifs, which can be read and translated. And it becomes a repository, a dictionary in a way. So, and it's used to cross this border. Oh dear. I'm very sorry. I'm having problems with it. So it crosses this body of water. So the stateless water village is just under 63 meters away from the island. The two communities do play together and collaborate, but their statuses are different, but their heritage is the same. They weave the same patterns. And within this lexicon of counting patterns, there are patterns that can be read across different Bajau communities. So, and this can be translated into, and this is then translated into obviously other contexts, such as within the exhibition itself, where it sort of was used during the launch of the exhibition to roll out between the gallery that was facing the sea and the gallery that was facing the hills. So again, sort of joined between Tanah dan Air. We see the image here with everyone who attended the launch together rolling out the mat. And so I think we're probably running out of time. So I come to the exhibition as Tika and Tamu and my own learning from this extraordinary project. In my many years of exhibition making, I've not come across or been involved in a project with this level of collaboration and letting go. All this within a context of the pandemic. Myself and Rachel, my partner RogueArt, based in Kuala Lumpur, Yee I-Lann based in Kota Kinabalu, the collaboratives based in Semporna and in Keningau, where nobody could actually reach each other. It was supported by Silver Lens, Yee-I-Lann's gallery in Manila. It was an extraordinary experience working with all these people. And somehow it was really an experiment too in how, if there were no leading institutions, if there were no hard and fast rules about how the exhibition should be, what would happen. And what did happen was that people came on board. The Sabah Art Gallery came on board, not with their space, which couldn't have accommodated the exhibition, but with their staff and manpower and their media network. So their team came to help install, and they manned the exhibition. They helped us to reach out to the media, organize the protocols for the launch, help to get the relevant permits, etc., etc. The Sabah International Convention Center turned up after we'd lost our venue at the last minute, and gave us offered this wonderful space, which was located on the sea and facing the hills, which was so perfect for the theme of Tanah dan Air. Friends came on board to help install. We worked on Zoom. I think the pictures sort of give a sense of the community that happened. There are a lot of women involved. I don't know if that was part of it, probably. And so that was the spirit of Borneo Heart. The exhibition itself was, despite the MCO, well attended. But what I found extraordinary was that the level of engagement and keenness. I think because the exhibition was made for Sabah. It had to begin there because the mats had to be celebrated with the collaborators. It had to be shown off to Sabahans before it traveled out to Chat or Kuala Lumpur. And the messaging was for Sabah. So I think on a sort of twice or three times a week, Yee-I-Lann would be doing her tours in the space. And it really kind of imparting these lessons and reimagining one's own politics and economics using homegrown concepts and languages. And so with this medium of the Tikar and with these regular tours by Yee-I-Lann, the Tikar of course also belongs to them, even though it's not valued as a painting, let's say. It's a medium that's familiar. This is their shared aesthetics, right, in Sabah. So it really felt very inclusive of the audience. There was a very high level of inclusivity and engagement. More than perhaps any exhibition I've ever been involved in, or even perhaps been to. And I think it's best sort of exemplified by the response of to the Dusun Karaoke Mat in the exhibition. It's my favorite example of activating the Tikar. So inevitably, every day there would be groups of people gathering around this mat, which takes lyrics from well-loved, iconic Sabah, Dusun songs in Sabah. And they would sing. Actually, what I'd done was I tried to put together a playlist of karaoke playlist of these songs and done a sort of QR code, but it wasn't necessary because people would just come and they would just sing. And that was just extraordinary. Why can't the exhibition always be more like that? Why can't we always activate our audiences in that sense, giving something and in conversation? So we're very proud of the good vibes that were sent out for the exhibition and of the response. And more so, I think now that it has, the works have gone out and that chat have expanded the ideas of the exhibition, of the Tikar, so wonderfully in their programming and in the exhibition. I really enjoyed the Fisher Folk singing at chat the other day during the launch, and they also commissioned this wonderful Cantonese karaoke mat to speak to, I suppose, the local Hong Kong audience, and I hope that the Hong Kong audiences have enjoyed that. So the messaging really then is, please do share the Tikar. We hope that when the work comes back to Kuala Lumpur and we have the Borneo Heart exhibition there, that we can learn from what chat has done, and we will keep growing these ideas. So, Pontika, Matsukul, terima kasih, thank you. Doje, siasiani. Please visit borneoheart.yeeIlann.com to share the Tikar and have more conversations.
Thank you so much for that lovely presentation, Beverly. I really enjoyed the last video you shared. We're actually experiencing now and then in our docent tours, we have some people who would actually sing, or we hear people who are humming from the karaoke mat. I also really enjoyed this line you said about how we could conceive of the museum less as a table and more of a mat. I think that's very beautiful in a sense that our team had such a wonderful time working with Yee I-Lann, and we still are having such a good time, and our energy is very infectious. So this whole exhibition to all of us just feels very personal. There's a very clear sense of the trajectory that you just mapped out of her career, these moments of working with a community and then introspection. It's very clear, and your talk brings it together for us. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Bruce. I hope, I'm sorry it was so long. I didn't mean it to be quite so long.
Oh, not at all, not at all. We did receive several questions from the chat box and the Q&A box. So if you don't mind, Beverly, we might overrun for just a few minutes, but I'd like to address them because they're great questions, actually. So on the note of trajectories, one of our audiences asked, I'm wondering how audiences and art community in KL see and understand Yee I-Lann's work of the unique historical and cultural context of Sabah.
Well, actually, they haven't seen it. We did have, I mean, people who visited the online exhibition we did have some very lovely responses and reviews, but I think mostly people hope that it will come there because in a sense, to experience the scale and the feeling of the Tikar, and also to program it, to engage with the local ideas and the KL community, that would be really important. So no, it has not actually been seen yet, yeah.
Oh, I see. Thank you. We have another question that is a little bit more specific. We're going back to specific artworks and the motifs representations used. What is the significance of the image of the table and its hovering shadow in the measuring project?
Well, I think as we talked about, the table being a symbol of hard power, right? Sort of patriarchal power that's sort of on top of you, given to you. It represented is its representation, but also of given knowledge. So tables are kind of hierarchical structures that don't belong, I suppose, to, let's say, indigenous culture in the sense of the mat. So the shadow of the table is the shadow of those systems of patriarchy, not and knowledge, not necessarily all negative, but that it is something that looms over us. So on the table, so it's really just playing with different dynamics between the table and the mat. I believe, yeah, that's how I read it.
we're very excited to see the upcoming chapters to that project, actually.
Yes, so am I.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah, we're thinking about, I think I-Lann is listening to this right now. So I-Lann, we're excited, just to let you know. This is a question that comes from myself, actually. I want to maybe hear a little bit about, Beverly, your interpretation of how photography and textiles may or may not be related. In my sort of experience of the talk, I get the sense that photography is a very introspective tool to look at greater contexts. I mean, it's also, yeah, and then
carry on.
And then to me, textiles, as you said, is this it's almost there's such an edge to it because it's about an artist who is losing control, losing giving into collaboration in a very beautiful way. So to me, they're actually quite different, or I guess to a lot of people, they might come off as very different. So maybe you could comment a little bit on that.
I think possibly, certainly I think the process of making works with photographic images and collaboratively with Tikar, those are very different. But I think the use of, I-Lann's use of photographic imagery, it's usually found imagery. So it's also using motifs. So there's definitely a correlation of these kind of building up of knowledge through motifs and the language of the image, which correlates to the language of the aesthetics of traditional crafts. So motifs, color, patterning. In a sense, there is definitely that idea of embedded knowledge in both. So the knowledge that we invest in images, the knowledge we invest in motifs and ways of weaving and craft as a whole. So I think that would be the connection to me, a way of unpacking things. Yeah.
I see. That's a lovely explanation because I just think it's interesting that there is this going back and forth, it seems. I mean, now I-Lann is simultaneously working on the Tikar projects, but also with the measuring project, for example, it's also a turn to photography once again.
I don't think we think once again. I think it's definitely correlated. Yeah, I mean, it's her own medium. That's her familiar medium, right? She's not a weaver. She can't weave. She doesn't have that skill. I think she did try. It didn't work out. But that's her medium. That's her way of thinking through. So she would still, I mean, just like an artist would, someone who draws would always use a sketchbook. That's her sketchbook, in a sense. And working out ideas in that way. And of course, certain audiences, it's very important that, let's say the contemporary art audience can read the concepts, and maybe they can read the concepts better through images that use contemporary art language, but related to the Tikar work, if you know what I mean. So I think there's an element of that too.
I see. I'm curious to know, in your working with I-Lann for a show like Borneo Heart, you mentioned that it's maybe the first time that you've worked on a show that is so collaborative. Were there ever moments or discussions between you and the artist about what the artist's role is like? Did it ever verge on something that was beyond art or not art? Did it ever feel like that for a moment?
What do you mean? I'm not quite sure what you mean.
Did it ever feel like this was appropriately more about the community than it is about the artwork?
I think the two things are very embedded. I think that it's an occasion where kind of life and experience is part of the art making, as much as vice versa. I think that's why it is so compelling to me anyway. I think there were, I think the thing is that somewhere like Sabah, where the structures of the art world are not so stuck in place, expectations are more fluid, right? You can do more because people are expecting certain things, so it's more open. So in that sense, it was more porous. I think in terms of where the artist's role was, I think, yeah, of course there were questions that came up here and there. For example, how to make a label. You know, I made the mistake of not even putting Yee-Lann's name on the labels because in a museum that has the name of the artist in the exhibition, everyone would assume that's the artist's work. But because there wasn't that solid, the standard practice, people didn't know that. Sometimes people didn't know that she was the artist. So that was new. That was a kind of like, moment, things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we're very, I mean, personally, it's been great to see all the names listed out in our captions. The sort of effort that has gone into doing that, I think is very touching, and yeah, for our whole team to see that. So thank you. There is another question that I want to ask. It goes back to the textile and photography. And how, you know, on a certain level, they're very linked. But maybe, Beverly, you could reveal to us, or maybe share with us what that transition was like. I know it still happens all together right now, but what was the moment like for Yee-Lann to first begin, you know, sort of playing around, messing around with textiles? I know that, was it the moment she returned to KK, or how did that happen?
I think that's a story that she's not for me to tell, but she's related in that sense of looking at photographs of her grandmother and her childhood and seeing the mat in those old photographs. That's kind of one moment of recognition. And then I think that would probably be the connection, yeah, between photography and the mat as such. I think it would be a question to ask Yee-Lann. I mean, how did she feel as she was transitioning? I'm not sure, because there's a self-portrait that she's made, which I was going to put in the talk, but it was going to be too long, which kind of almost details and unpacks this idea of self-searching, and she's lying on a mat and covered with sort of tables are piled on top of her, and she is her own figure is woven through in different positions, and there's all this motifs and sort of imagery to unpack about finding her mat and finding herself. So again, that's a sketching out of working out of these ideas. So I think because within the conceptualization of the mats and what they do, those are very powerful, but the language is partly hers, whereas I think when she's actually sort of working out something, then the photography comes in. I think there's that sense of talking about the personal and talking about larger ideas. It's two different things.
Yeah, I think the way, to me, the way Yee-Lann inserts herself in these different moments in her work, to me, is about this idea of being very visible, the idea of a billboard. I enjoy that quite a lot. And in our exhibition right now, we have Yee-Lann's childhood photographs. That photograph you mentioned of her on a car, I think is one of the best parts of the show. Yeah. So we're just about running out of time, Beverly. I want to express my gratitude for your lovely presentation again. I think it's so beautifully embodies what we have showing at chat right now. And we're excited that you said that you're also excited to see what experiences we could share with you from chat.
Please, yes, I look forward to that.
Yeah, we'll let you know. We'll keep you posted on that and keep you updated on how the visitors are reacting. So thank you.